The morning of my wedding started with a silence I couldn't explain. Not the peaceful kind, not the calm before the storm kind, the wrong kind. I stood in the hotel room staring at my phone, watching the screen light up and go dark again, waiting for a message that never came. No good morning, no we're on our way, no excited photos from the drive. Just nothing. At first, I told myself they were busy. Weddings are hectic. People run late, phones die. I tried to stay calm, smoothing the fabric of my dress with shaking hands, reminding myself that today wasn't about logistics. It was about commitment. It was about starting my life. Still, the silence pressed in on me. I took a deep breath and grounded myself the way I always did when things felt uncertain, by reminding myself who I was in this moment. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 28 years old, and in a few hours I was supposed to walk down the aisle knowing my parents were sitting in the front row. The ceremony was scheduled for early afternoon. The venue was already buzzing by mid-morning, bridesmaids moving in and out, stylists setting up, my fiancé pacing nervously down the hall. Everyone else seemed excited. I felt hollow. Around noon, I finally called my mom. It rang 3 times before going to voicemail. I tried my dad next, straight to voicemail. That's when a familiar tightness settled in my chest. I'd felt it before, many times. That quiet instinct that told me something had shifted and I was the last one to know. The message that changed the day. The text came 30 minutes later, from my mom. "Honey, I'm so sorry, we won't make it today." I stared at the screen, waiting for the rest of the message to load. Nothing else came. My fingers trembled as I typed back. "What do you mean you won't make it?" The reply came quickly this time. "Your brother needs us. This is serious." Serious. No explanation. No apology that matched the weight of what she was saying. Just a declaration. I felt the room tilt slightly as I sat down on the edge of the bed. "Today is my wedding," I typed. There was a pause this time. Then, "We know and we love you. We'll explain later." Later. Later was apparently good enough for them. The reality sets in. I didn't cry. Not yet. I felt numb, like my body was buying time before letting the reality hit. My parents, who had helped plan this wedding, who had talked about it for months, who knew exactly how much this day meant to me, were choosing not to come. They were choosing my brother instead. I asked one more question. "Is he okay?" My mom replied, "He's going through something. He really needs support right now." Support. That word echoed in my head, because when I needed support growing up, the expectation was always the same. You're strong, you'll understand, your brother needs us more right now. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the headboard. This wasn't new, it was just louder. My brother had always been the emergency, the crisis, the one who required immediate attention. Missed birthdays, canceled plans, delayed celebrations. There was always a reason. I had always understood. Until today. Walking down the aisle without them. When the ceremony began, I barely remember the music. I remember standing at the entrance, bouquet in my hands, heart pounding, not with nerves, but with grief. I scanned the front row out of habit. 2 empty seats stared back at me. My fiancé squeezed my hand gently. "You okay?" he whispered. I nodded. What else could I do? I walked down the aisle anyway. I smiled anyway. I said my vows anyway. And the entire time, a quiet truth settled into my chest. They weren't late. They weren't stuck. They weren't coming. The explanation everyone accepted. After the ceremony, people asked where my parents were. I repeated the same line over and over. They had a family emergency. People nodded sympathetically. No one questioned it, because emergencies always justified absence in my family. The question I couldn't ignore. Later that night, after the reception wound down and the adrenaline faded, I sat alone with my phone and reread my mom's messages. "He needs us. We'll explain later." Something about the wording bothered me. Not what she said, what she didn't. She hadn't said hospital, she hadn't said accident, she hadn't said danger, just support. And suddenly a question formed that refused to leave. What kind of situation could possibly justify missing your daughter's wedding? And why did it feel like the answer was going to change far more than just one day? I didn't know it yet, but that absence wasn't the betrayal. It was the cover. Because what I found out later would force me to see my family and my role in it in a completely different way. The morning after my wedding, the world felt quieter. Not peaceful, just muted, like everything had been turned down a notch. My husband slept beside me, his breathing steady, one arm draped protectively across my waist. For a moment, I let myself stay still, listening to that sound, grounding myself in the fact that at least one part of my life had gone right. Then I remembered the empty seats, the unanswered calls, the word emergency hanging in the air without a shape. I reached for my phone. No new messages from my parents. Waiting for the explanation. They'd promised to explain later. Later had come and gone. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. My brother had always had a way of pulling chaos into his orbit. Maybe this time it really was serious. Maybe something had happened that justified everything. I wanted to believe that, so I waited. By noon, I couldn't stand it anymore. I called my dad. He answered on the third ring, his voice tired but calm. "Hey," he said, "how are you feeling?" That was the first thing he asked. Not congratulations, not I'm sorry we weren't there. Just a neutral check-in like yesterday hadn't mattered. "I'm okay," I replied. "Can you tell me what happened?" There was a pause. I heard background noise, maybe traffic. He wasn't at a hospital. "Well," he said slowly, "your brother's been having a rough time." Rough time. Those words landed like a dull thud. "What kind of rough time?" I asked. Another pause. "He and his girlfriend broke up," my dad said. "It hit him pretty hard." I closed my eyes. That was it. No accident, no medical emergency, no danger. A breakup. The weight of the truth. "You missed my wedding," I said quietly. "I know," my dad replied, "and we hated doing that, but he really needed us." Needed. The same word my mom had used. I felt something inside me go very still. "He's 32, I said. "I'm your daughter." My dad sighed. "Rachel, you know how sensitive he is." Sensitive. There it was. The justification that had covered every decision for as long as I could remember. Hearing it from my mom. Later that afternoon, my mom finally called. Her voice was soft, careful, like she was stepping onto thin ice. "Sweetheart, we're so proud of you." I didn't respond. She continued anyway. "We didn't want to hurt you. Your brother was spiraling. We were worried about him." "Worried how?" I asked. "Well, emotionally," she said. "He was drinking a lot, saying things." "What things?" I pressed. She hesitated. "He thought he felt alone, that everything always goes wrong for him." I let out a slow breath. "And my wedding?" I asked. "Where did that fit into the concern?" She didn't answer right away. "We assumed you'd understand," she said finally. That sentence hurt more than the rest. The assumption that always protected them. They assumed I'd understand. They assumed I'd be okay. They assumed I'd absorb the disappointment quietly, the way I always had. Because I was the stable one, the one who didn't fall apart, the one who didn't need rescuing. But listening to my mom explain why my brother's breakup outweighed my wedding day, I realized something I'd never let myself think before. Understanding had become an expectation, and expectations are easy to exploit. The detail that didn't sit right. After the call ended, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall. Something still didn't sit right. If my brother had been drinking and spiraling, why hadn't they mentioned any of that in the text? Why had everything been so vague? And why did it feel like they were choosing their words carefully now? I pulled up social media without really thinking. That's when I saw it. A photo posted by a mutual friend, taken the night of my wedding. My brother was in it, at a bar, smiling, an arm slung around someone's shoulders. The caption read, "Didn't see this coming, but here we are." My heart sank. This didn't look like a crisis. It looked like distraction. The question that changed everything. I stared at the photo, zooming in on the timestamp. It had been taken during my reception, while I was cutting the cake, while I was dancing with my husband, while my parents were supposed to be in the front row. My parents weren't at a hospital. They weren't at home watching him. They'd been out, trying to keep him company while he coped with heartbreak. And suddenly, the word emergency felt like a lie designed to end the conversation. I set my phone down slowly, because if they were willing to label a breakup as a crisis worth missing my wedding, then this wasn't just about my brother's feelings, it was about priorities. And I had a sinking feeling I was about to learn just how low on the list I really was. I didn't show the photo to my husband right away. Not because I was hiding anything, because I didn't know how to explain the feeling it gave me. It wasn't just hurt, it was something sharper, quieter. It was the sensation of being handled, like my parents had wrapped the truth in soft words so I wouldn't push too hard. Emergency. He needed us. We assumed you'd understand. Those phrases had always worked. They were counting on them working again. But the photo of my brother at the bar, smiling during my reception, did something I didn't expect. It turned my sadness into suspicion, when grief turns into questions. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my coffee untouched. I kept telling myself to let it go. People mess up. Families disappoint. Maybe I was looking for reasons to be angry because anger felt safer than being hurt. Then I remembered the empty seats and the fact that my parents hadn't even tried to come late. If it had been truly serious, if my brother had been in danger, why did he have time for a bar photo? I zoomed in again. There was something else in the frame I hadn't noticed at first. A receipt on the table. One of those long white bar receipts, the kind that curls at the end. I couldn't read it, but I didn't need to, because the photo confirmed something my parents hadn't said out loud. They had made a choice, not under pressure, not in panic, with intention. The first call I made. I called my aunt, my mom's sister, the one person who usually stayed neutral in family dynamics. She picked up quickly. "How's married life?" she asked warmly. I swallowed. "Aunt Denise, do you know what happened yesterday? Why my parents didn't come?" There was a pause. A small one, but I caught it. "Oh," she said carefully. "Honey, I heard your brother was having a hard time. Did you hear anything else?" I asked gently. I don't want to get in the middle of something. That sentence was its own answer. If it was truly a simple breakup, there would be nothing to get in the middle of. "What did you hear?" I pressed gently. Another pause. Then, softly, "I heard there was money involved." My stomach tightened. "Money?" I repeated. She hesitated. "Your mom mentioned something about your brother being in trouble, that he needed help fast." I sat back in my chair. Help fast? Money involved, missed wedding. My pulse quickened. The story starts expanding. After I got off the phone, I called my dad again. This time, I didn't ask about emotions. I asked about details. "Where were you yesterday?" I said, keeping my tone calm. He exhaled. "Rachel, we've talked about this." "Not really," I replied. "You told me your brother needed support. Where were you?" Silence. Then, "We were with him." "At the bar?" I asked. Another silence. "How do you know that?" he said, finally, voice tightening. So he knew. He knew it looked bad. "We saw a photo," I said. My dad sighed as if I was being unreasonable. "Rachel, he was upset. We were trying to keep him from doing something stupid." "Like what?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. "He needed us," he repeated. There it was again, the same loop, the same wording, designed to end the conversation. So I changed tactics. "Dad," I said carefully, "did you give him money yesterday?" His breathing changed, just slightly. "No," he said, too quickly. And that was the moment I knew I was right to keep digging. The question they didn't want asked. I tried my mom next. She answered on the second ring, voice bright and falsely casual. "Hi, sweetheart." "Mom," I said, "did you give him money yesterday?" The brightness vanished. "Why are you asking that?" she replied, sharp. "Because Aunt Denise said they heard money was involved." My mom went quiet. Then she tried to soften it. "It's complicated." Complicated. Not no, not you're wrong. Complicated. I felt my grip tighten on the phone. "Mom," I said, "you missed my wedding. I deserve to know what was so urgent you couldn't show up, even for an hour." Her voice lowered. "Rachel, this isn't the time." "When is the time?" I asked. She didn't answer. The detail that refused to stay buried. That night, after my husband fell asleep, I opened my laptop again and did something I never thought I'd do. I searched my brother's name in my email, then in my messages, then in my bank app, just to check something that had been nagging at me. Because years ago, my parents had asked me to co-sign something small for my brother, just to help him get started. They'd framed it as harmless. And back then, I'd been younger, eager to be helpful, eager to be the easy daughter. I remembered signing paperwork. I remembered trusting them. I remembered not asking many questions. Now, sitting in the glow of my laptop screen, I felt cold. What if that help had never ended? What if my brother's emergency wasn't emotional at all? What if it was financial and my parents were covering something up? The thought settled heavy in my chest. Because if money was involved, then missing my wedding wasn't just a cruel choice. It was a distraction, and I was starting to understand why they wanted me to understand so badly. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, pieces of my past replayed themselves in a new order. Conversations that once felt harmless, now lining up into something unsettling. It wasn't just about my wedding anymore. It was about everything that had quietly happened around it. By morning, I knew I couldn't ignore the question sitting in my chest. What had I agreed to years ago without really understanding it? The old favor that came back to me. I opened my email again, this time scrolling back years instead of days. I searched for my brother's name. At first, nothing jumped out. Then, buried deep between college newsletters and old receipts, I found it. A confirmation email. Subject line, "Loan application approved." My hands went cold. I opened it slowly, my eyes scanning the details I'd once skimmed and forgotten. Co-signer, Rachel Monroe. My name. The date was from 4 years ago, right after I'd started my first full-time job. I remembered that period clearly. My parents had sat me down, told me my brother was trying to get on his feet. They said the bank just needed someone with steady income. "It's just a formality," my mom had said. "He'll handle everything," my dad had added, and I'd believed them. the amount that took my breath away. I clicked into the attached document. The loan wasn't small. It wasn't a temporary cushion. It was substantial enough that missing payments would matter, enough that default would follow me, not him. My pulse thudded in my ears as I read further. Payment history, irregular. Late notices, multiple. Balance remaining, far higher than I'd expected. I scrolled back to the recent entries. A large payment had been made. The date? The morning of my wedding. The timing that changed everything. I sat there staring at the screen. My parents hadn't missed my wedding because my brother was sad. They'd missed it because they were handling the fallout of a financial mess, a mess I was legally tied to. I checked my bank app, my credit monitoring alerts, things I'd set up years ago but rarely looked at closely. There it was, a recent activity notice I'd dismissed as routine. Someone had paid off part of the loan. Not my brother, my parents. The truth settled in. Suddenly, everything made sense. The urgency, the vagueness, the refusal to give details. They hadn't wanted me asking questions on my wedding day. They hadn't wanted me distracted by paperwork, phone calls, or banks. They needed me focused on vows and flowers, while they quietly fixed something that could have ruined my credit and exposed years of enabling. The call that confirmed it. I called my mom again. This time, I didn't dance around it. "I know about the loan," I said. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. "You went looking?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, "and I saw the payment made yesterday morning." She didn't deny it. "We were going to tell you," she said quickly, "just not right now." "When?" I asked. "After things settled," she replied. "After my wedding, after the distraction passed." The justification that hurt the most. "He was scared," she continued. "The bank was calling. We didn't want you worrying on your big day." I laughed softly, humorless. "You didn't want me worrying, or you didn't want me asking why this was still my responsibility?" "That's not fair," she snapped. "No, what's not fair is finding out you missed my wedding to fix something that affects my future without telling me." She was quiet again. Then she said something I'd heard my entire life. "You're the responsible one. We knew you'd handle it." Handle it. The word echoed in my head. The real betrayal. The betrayal wasn't that my brother had messed up. I'd expected that. It was that my parents had continued to involve me without consent, assuming my stability meant endless obligation. They hadn't chosen him over me emotionally. They'd chosen convenience over honesty, and my wedding day was collateral damage. What they didn't count on. What they didn't count on was me looking closely. They assumed I'd stay in the dark, grateful for whatever explanation they offered later. They assumed I'd continue carrying responsibility without question. That assumption ended the moment I saw my name on that loan. Because this wasn't about forgiveness, it was about accountability. And once money, legality, and trust intersect, things don't get smoothed over. They get resolved. I closed my laptop slowly, my mind already moving ahead. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to threaten. I was going to protect myself. And the next step would change the balance they'd relied on for years. Once you see your name on a legal document tied to someone else's chaos, something shifts permanently. I couldn't unsee it. That loan wasn't just paperwork. It was proof. Proof that my parents had made decisions about my life without my consent long after I was old enough to give or withhold it. And they'd done it quietly. The weight of being reliable. I spent the next day replaying every time I'd been described the same way. "You're so responsible. You don't need help. You'll land on your feet." Those words had always sounded like compliments. Now I understood what they really were: permissions. Permissions my parents had taken for years to lean on me, to involve me, to use my stability as a safety net for my brother's instability, and they never once asked if I was okay with that role. The conversation that reframed everything. That evening, my husband sat across from me at the kitchen table while I laid everything out: the missed payments, the wedding day transaction, the years of silence. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with every detail. "They missed our wedding to clean up something you didn't even know was still active?" I nodded. "That's not support," he said. "That's control." Hearing someone else say it out loud steadied me, because control thrives in ambiguity, and I was done being unclear. Calling the bank changed the power dynamic. The next morning, I called the bank, not to accuse, not to complain, to understand. The representative was calm, professional, direct. "Yes, you are still legally responsible. No, we have not received regular payments from the primary borrower. Yes, missed payments could impact your credit if not resolved." I thanked her and hung up. There was no drama in her voice, no moral judgment, just facts. And facts don't bend for family loyalty. The question I finally asked myself. I sat there afterward, phone still warm in my hand, and asked myself something I'd avoided for years. Why had I agreed in the first place? The answer was uncomfortable. Because I'd been conditioned to. Because saying yes kept peace. Because saying no felt selfish. Because my parents had framed it as temporary, harmless, necessary. Because my brother's needs had always been louder than my boundaries. The permission I gave myself. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a different role. Not the fixer, not the buffer, not the one who made things easier for everyone else. Just me, someone with her own future to protect. The boundary they never expected. I didn't confront them immediately. Instead, I took action. I scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor. I explored my options: legal, practical, preventative. I learned exactly what could be done to separate myself from ongoing risk. I didn't need revenge. I needed clarity. And clarity gave me leverage. The shift they felt before they understood. My mom called that afternoon. "Everything okay?" she asked carefully. I smiled to myself. "Actually," I said, "I'm just getting informed." There was a pause. "Informed about what?" she asked. "My responsibilities and my limits." She didn't respond right away, because that wasn't a language they were used to hearing from me. Why this changed the entire story. Missing my wedding had hurt, but discovering the loan reframed the hurt into something sharper. It wasn't neglect, it was exploitation wrapped in affection. And once you recognize that, you don't ask for apologies, you reclaim autonomy. I closed my notebook feeling calmer than I had in weeks, because the most dangerous thing my family had done wasn't choosing my brother, it was assuming I'd always be there to absorb the consequences. That assumption was about to cost them access they'd taken for granted. I didn't confront them right away. That was the part that surprised even me. Old versions of myself would have rushed into a conversation, trying to explain why I was hurt, why this crossed a line, why it mattered. I would have hoped for understanding, for remorse, for reassurance that they hadn't meant it the way it felt. But I wasn't that version of myself anymore. I had learned something important. People who benefit from your silence panic when it's replaced with boundaries. So instead of speaking, I changed how I moved. Pulling back without announcing it. The first thing I did was stop sharing. No updates about work, no details about finances, no casual mentions of plans. When my mom called and asked how things were going, I kept my answers polite but brief. Busy. Good. Figuring things out. At first, she didn't notice. She was still focused on my brother, on smoothing over his problems, managing his emotions, cleaning up his messes. But the absence of information eventually registered, because I had always been transparent, predictable, available. The first boundary I set quietly. I contacted the bank again and asked what it would take to remove myself from the loan. The answer wasn't simple, but it wasn't impossible either. The primary borrower would need to refinance, or the loan would need to be paid off. Either way, it required action that didn't involve me continuing to carry silent risk. I didn't tell my parents yet. I wanted to be fully prepared before that conversation happened. The call that felt different. A few days later, my dad called, not to check on me, to ask a question. "Hey," he said carefully, "did you talk to the bank?" I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. "Yes," I replied. The line went quiet. "How did you know?" I asked calmly. He cleared his throat. "Your mom noticed some alerts." Alerts. The system had noticed before they did. Watching the comfort fade. I just wanted to understand my responsibilities, since no one explained them to me. His tone shifted. "Rachel, we were handling it." I smiled faintly. "That's the problem. You were handling it without me." The reaction I expected, and the one I didn't. I expected defensiveness. I got fear. "What are you trying to do?" my dad asked. "I'm trying to protect my future. That shouldn't be controversial." He didn't argue. He couldn't, because legality doesn't care about family dynamics. The sister conversation that revealed everything. Later that evening, my sister texted, "Did you talk to Mom and Dad about the loan?" There it was. Not concern, not apology, awareness. "Yes," I replied simply. She didn't answer for a while. Then, "Why would you do that now?" I stared at the screen. Because now mattered. Because now I knew. Because now I wasn't willing to be collateral. The unspoken threat beneath her words. She followed up quickly. "They've been under a lot of stress." I exhaled slowly. "They always are. That doesn't mean I stop protecting myself." She didn't respond, and for the first time, I felt the power dynamic tilt. What silence took away from them. They were used to me filling gaps, explaining, justifying, soothing. By staying calm and saying less, I took that away. They didn't know how far I'd go. They didn't know what steps I'd already taken. They didn't know how much access they still had. And uncertainty is uncomfortable for people who rely on control. The calm that anchored me. That night, I sat with my husband on the couch, my head resting against his shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said honestly. And I was, because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. Choosing transparency over obligation. Choosing responsibility with consent. Choosing myself without apology. They still believed this was a phase, a reaction, a moment of hurt. They didn't understand yet that this was a structural change, one that couldn't be undone by explanations or guilt. And when they finally realized that, it would be too late to put me back where they were comfortable. The first crack showed up in a place I didn't expect. Not in a confrontation, not in a confession, but in confusion. When their explanations stopped matching. A week after my conversation with the bank, my mom invited me to lunch. Her tone was overly cheerful, the kind she used when she wanted things to feel normal. We sat across from each other at a small cafe. She talked about the weather, about the baby, about how tired my brother had been lately. I listened. Then she said something that made my fork pause halfway to my mouth. "We've always tried to be fair," she said casually. "Fair?" I looked up. "How?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "How have you been fair?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Well," she said slowly, "you and your brother are just different." Different. That word again, the one that explained everything without saying anything at all. The version she couldn't defend. "I understand that," I said, "but fairness isn't about being the same, it's about being honest." Her smile faltered. "We didn't think you needed to know everything," she replied. I leaned back in my chair. "And that's where the story stops working," I said quietly. She looked at me, confused now. "What story?" she asked. "The one where you protect me by keeping me in the dark, because that protection only ever seemed to benefit one person." She didn't argue. She couldn't. The phone call that changed the tone. That evening, my dad called. Not defensive, not apologetic, careful. "We might need to talk about the loan," he said. "Might?" I asked. He sighed. "Your brother's upset. He thinks you're overreacting." I almost laughed. Of course he does. He's never been the one carrying the risk. Silence. Then, reluctantly, "That's not untrue." That was the first time either of them had admitted it. The story starts splitting. Over the next few days, I noticed something else. Their explanations stopped being unified. My mom framed it as protection. My dad framed it as necessity. My brother framed it as misunderstanding. 3 different narratives, all incompatible. And once stories split, they collapse. The moment my brother slipped. The slip came during a group call. My brother was frustrated, pacing in the background of the video. "I didn't ask for all this," he said sharply. I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't ask?" I said calmly. He hesitated. "Well, I didn't force them." There it was, the difference between asking and accepting, between responsibility and entitlement. "And you knew I was on the loan." He shrugged. "I assumed Mom and Dad told you everything." I didn't respond, because his assumption said more than any confession ever could. Watching the narrative collapse. After that call, the tone shifted completely. My parents stopped minimizing, my brother stopped pretending, and I stopped explaining. The truth didn't need reinforcement anymore. It was standing on its own. The power of staying grounded. What surprised me was how calm I felt. No shaking hands, no racing thoughts, just clarity. They could see now that the story they'd relied on, "Rachel will understand," was no longer working. And without that story, they had nothing left to lean on. The question they finally asked. A few nights later, my mom called again. This time, her voice was quiet. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Not "how do we fix this?" Not "can you forgive us?" But "what do you want to do?" I took a breath. "I want my name off the loan, and I want honesty going forward." There was no argument, just a soft acknowledgement. "We'll talk to him," she said. Why this moment mattered. That question, "what do you want?" was the turning point, because it meant they finally understood something fundamental had changed. I wasn't asking for validation. I wasn't seeking approval. I was setting terms. And terms are non-negotiable when they're rooted in self-respect. They'd built a family dynamic around my flexibility. Now they were facing a version of me that didn't bend, and they didn't know how to handle it yet. But they were about to learn. Once the words were in the open, "I want my name off the loan," everything moved faster than I expected. Not because they were eager to fix things, because reality had finally entered the conversation. When family met the system. My parents called me 2 days later. Complicated. Complicated meant expensive. It meant accountability. It meant my brother couldn't keep floating while everyone else absorbed the weight. The shift in who was uncomfortable. For the first time, they were uneasy, not me. My parents started asking questions they'd never asked before. Can he afford this? What happens if he can't refinance? Is there a deadline? Questions they should have asked years ago, before involving me. But now the risk was visible, and it had a name. Mine. The brother who was suddenly angry. My brother didn't call at first. He texted, "I can't believe you'd do this to me right now." Right now, as if there was ever a convenient time for responsibility. "I didn't do this to you. I'm stepping out of something I never agreed to carry forever." He called immediately after that. "I know you're trying," he snapped. "You're putting pressure on everyone." I stayed calm. "I've been under pressure for years," I said. "You just didn't notice because it wasn't loud." Silence. He wasn't used to being spoken to that way. The guilt attempt that didn't land. "Mom and Dad are stressed. You're tearing the family apart." I almost smiled. "No," I replied. "I'm refusing to hold it together by myself anymore." That was the moment the script broke. Because guilt only works when you accept responsibility for things that aren't yours. I didn't. Watching my parents recalculate. Over the next week, I noticed a change. My parents stopped asking me to be patient. They stopped telling me to understand. They stopped minimizing. Instead, they started negotiating. "How much time do we have? What would make you comfortable? Is there a way to do this smoothly?" Smoothly, as if the last few years had been smooth for me. The legal reality that changed everything. The bank set a timeline. Either my brother refinanced within a fixed period, or the loan would need to be resolved another way. That clock changed everything. My parents couldn't stall, my brother couldn't deflect, and I couldn't be ignored. The system didn't care about family roles, it cared about contracts. The wedding absence comes back around. One night, my mom called again. Her voice cracked this time. "I keep thinking about your wedding, about how we weren't there." I didn't rush to comfort her. "I think about it too," I replied. She sighed. "We never meant it to happen like that." "I know, but intent doesn't undo impact." That line stayed between us. The consequence they never considered. What my parents hadn't planned for wasn't anger, it was withdrawal. They'd always assumed access to my time, my understanding, my resources would remain intact no matter what choices they made. They were wrong, because once boundaries appear, access changes. The calm that told me I'd done the right thing. As the deadline approached, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because the situation was resolved yet, but because I was no longer carrying it alone. I had placed responsibility where it belonged, and whatever happened next wouldn't be absorbed quietly by me. The quiet power shift. They were still my family, I still loved them, but love no longer meant sacrifice without consent. And they were starting to understand that this wasn't a phase, it wasn't punishment, it was permanence. The system was now involved, the truth was now visible, and for the first time, the consequences weren't landing on me. The day the bank deadline arrived, no one said the word deadline out loud, but everyone felt it. The tension hung in every conversation, every pause, every carefully chosen sentence. For years, my family had survived by delaying hard decisions, pushing them just far enough into the future that someone else would deal with them. This time, there was no one left to absorb the impact. The call that sounded different. My dad called early that morning, not rushed, not defensive, resigned. "Your brother met with the bank," he said. "They won't approve the refinance." I closed my eyes. Not because I was surprised, because it meant the illusion was finally gone. "What happens next?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "We'll have to clear the balance." We. Not you, not him, we. That single word carried years of unspoken acknowledgement. The brother who had nothing left to say. My brother didn't call that day. For the first time, he had nothing to argue, nothing to reframe, nothing to guilt me with. The system didn't care that he was struggling. It didn't care that he felt overwhelmed. It cared about numbers, and numbers don't bend for entitlement. The moment my parents understood. Later that evening, my mom came over. She looked smaller somehow, tired in a way I hadn't seen before. She sat across from me and said quietly, We didn't realize how much this affected you." I didn't interrupt. She continued, "We thought we were protecting everyone, but we were really just delaying responsibility." I nodded. "Yes," I said, "you were." She didn't argue. That was new. The wedding finally addressed. After a moment, she added, "Missing your wedding was the worst decision we made." I let the silence sit, because that sentence mattered more than any apology that came before it. I needed you there, not later, not in theory, that day. Her eyes filled with tears. "I know," she whispered, and for the first time, I believed her. The shift in how they saw me. What changed wasn't their love, it was their perception. They stopped seeing me as the one who would always compensate, the one who could be leaned on indefinitely. They were finally seeing me as someone whose life had consequences, legal, emotional, irreversible. And that awareness changed the dynamic permanently. The aftermath nobody talked about. The loan was paid off 2 days later. My credit remained intact. No celebration followed, no relief speeches, just a quiet understanding that something long overdue had finally been handled. My brother kept his distance after that, not out of anger, out of shame. And I didn't chase him. The space that felt earned. In the days that followed, my parents were different. They asked before assuming, they explained instead of deciding, they listened instead of managing. Not perfectly, but genuinely. And I noticed something else. I felt lighter, not vindicated, free. The truth that took years to surface. Families don't change because someone explodes. They change when the person who's been carrying the weight puts it down. Missing my wedding wasn't the moment everything broke. It was the moment everything became visible. And visibility changes outcomes, because once people see the cost of their choices clearly, they can't pretend it isn't there anymore. Only one thing remained now. Not confrontation, not closure, but decision about how much space I would allow moving forward. The day everything finally settled, there was no celebration, no relief party, no dramatic family hug where everything suddenly felt fixed. Just quiet. And for the first time in a long while, that quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The conversation that closed the chapter. A week after the loan was officially cleared, my parents asked if we could talk in person. I agreed. We sat in their living room, the same room where so many decisions had been made about me instead of with me. My dad spoke first. "We handled things the wrong way," he said, "for a long time." My mom nodded beside him. "We leaned on you because you were capable, and we told ourselves that made it okay." I listened without interrupting, because this wasn't about hearing apologies anymore. It was about seeing whether they understood the damage. "You didn't just lean on me," I said calmly. "You involved me in financial risk without consent. You missed one of the most important days of my life to clean up something that should have been handled years earlier." My mom's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't think about it that way," she said. "That's the problem," I replied. "You didn't think about it at all." The brother I no longer rescued. My brother wasn't there. That was intentional. This wasn't a conversation about him. It was about the system that protected him at my expense. Later, he sent me a message. I didn't mean for things to go this far. I read it once, then replied simply, "They went that far long before I said anything." He didn't respond. And that was okay, because I wasn't responsible for fixing his discomfort anymore. The role I finally refused. For most of my life, I had been the solution, the one who adjusted, the one who absorbed, the one who made things easier so no one else had to feel the weight. That role came with praise, but also with expectations. And expectations, when left unchallenged, become entitlement. I refused that role now, not loudly, not angrily, permanently. Saying my name again. That night, back home, I sat on the edge of the bed and did something small but grounding. I said my name out loud. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 28 years old and I am no longer the backup plan for other people's choices. Saying it didn't feel defiant, it felt steady. What changed forever? My parents didn't stop loving me, but they stopped assuming. They asked before involving. They explained instead of deciding. They hesitated where they once moved automatically, not because they were afraid of me, but because they finally respected the cost of not doing so. And that changed everything. The wedding that still mattered. I still think about my wedding day sometimes, about the empty seats, about the moment I realized I was walking forward without them. But I don't think about it with bitterness anymore. I think about it as the moment the imbalance became impossible to ignore, the moment I stopped accepting explanations that required my silence. The ending I chose. This story didn't end with revenge. It ended with boundaries, with clarity, with the understanding that love doesn't require self-sacrifice without consent, and that family doesn't get to decide your future just because they always have. I walked away from this with something far more valuable than an apology. I walked away with myself intact. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story meant something to you, I'll see you in the next one.